Good evening. My name is Dr. Larry Force, and I'm a professor of psychology at Mount St. Mary College and director of the Center on Aging and Disability Policy with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Kahana, who will be joining us tonight, who's here now. This is a video cast that we do based upon a program that we've created with the funding from New York State DDPC, Developmental Disability Planning Council. It's called Proactive Caring. This is an extension of it. It was a 3-year program to train 1,000 families with family members with intellectual disabilities, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And we were able to achieve that and achieve it with a whole team of people throughout the state, and the county, the state, and we even have some national supporters. We know that the DDPC actually had an opportunity to review our program, and what they were able to say is, by action, we did a wonderful job as a team. And what they did was they extended our program for a year. And what the program now is called the Proactive Caring Home and School Exchange Transition Exchange. And we're doing it in partnership with our friends and colleagues in Buffalo, called Parent Network of Western New York. You know, we pick up a phone, we meet these people, time goes on, they become friends, and they have been wonderful, wonderful supporters. Each week, what happens is we have Peggy Pisano and Lisa Nathan present. Peggy is a school psychologist, so she looks at the issue from a behavioral perspective, and she's an advocate. And Lisa is a parent with lived experience, and she's a meditator, and she's an advocate. Elaine Sproat is here. Elaine is the program director. Jeffrey and I asked her to join our program when it first initiated, and Elaine has been an unbelievable supportive team member. We also have Stacy Orzel. Stacy Orzel is the cheerleader of cheerleaders. Okay, you have a cause. Look around. Stacy's standing next to you, and we're so glad you're here. And Camille, I see you coming on now. Camelia, I don't know you, but we'll get to know you throughout this. We were under no illusion that people would be able to join us like a town hall. What we were able to do is do what we're doing now: capture it, record it, send it out through our mailing list. Our mailing list was just shy of 400 when we started. At the present time, it's over 4,000. So we know that this is reaching individuals, families, and agencies. Yes, for sure. Heart, big heart, big, big heart. So with that, what I'd like to do is, I guess I'd like to, we're going to introduce Dr. Kahana, but I'd like to introduce Peggy and Lisa, and maybe you could start this off just with telling what we're going to talk about tonight, and then we'll bring Jeffrey into it, and we'll make this flow very easily.
So I think tonight what we're going to discuss is sort of the IEP process, or the special education process, in a stress-free way, hopefully, or a less stress way, and look at the early years of development of an IEP, development of a special education program for your child. And Jeffrey's going to speak about that tonight. And then I think Lisa is going to give us just some mindful techniques so that we keep remembering what we've learned so far and keep that fresh in our mind.
Sounds good, Peggy. Yeah, that's we'll do the early years. We'll discuss that impact that it has, and how you go about transitioning from being a parent to being a parent of a special needs child, and into the process of the acronym land, of IEPs and CSEs and everything else that comes along with it.
Very true. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Dr. Jeff Kahana, friend, colleague, very good friend. And so we're so glad you're here. Jeffrey is the director, as well as I am, of the Center on Aging and Disability Policy. He's a historian, and he's also a JD, and he's also a parent of a child with special needs. So Lisa, Peggy, we just want to open it up for Jeff? That's how we'll do this. So Jeff, maybe we could talk about your reflections on the experiences of the IEP process in the early years.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Larry, for, putting this together. I've watched Peggy's very interesting presentations on the previous episodes of this from the point of view of a school psychologist. And I always learn a lot from her. And I've equally learned much from Lisa and how she has put together both the meditative part and mindfulness, along with the realities of being a parent, which is not easy often when you're dealing with various systems, and also with the realities of a child who does have special needs. And Elaine Sproat has been really a very, very constructive guide in putting together all of the presentations that we did in person, and providing the reports and encouraging us. And I'm grateful to be, to be able to share some thoughts with all of everyone here. And Stacy, I've seen, and that ladder of how we think about things is just great. And I guess I'm not going to come from a clinical point of view or from a legal point of view. I never practiced law in this area. I don't practice law now. I worked for an appeals court for a year after law school, and then I transitioned to being a history professor. So I guess it's the sort of lived experience that I can say a little bit about. And in terms of working with the schools and working with IEPs, Peggy might have some specific information about categories that she can share and about how somebody is eligible for these programs. From the parent point of view, I think the first step is, what happens when someone is diagnosed? I mean, how does that all go forward? What are the different ways that both diagnosis is done by clinicians, whether they're psychologists or pediatricians or neurologists, I mean, whoever is doing the diagnosis, and what are the parents' sort of internal challenges in terms of accepting a diagnosis or wanting a diagnosis or being able to live with a diagnosis. In my case, my son Zeke was not yet 2, and we saw that he had he'd lost quite a few words. And so I was put in touch with a neurologist who was at Montefiore, and her name was Isabel Rappin. She was a very influential neurologist and had done a lot of work. And she spoke to me on the telephone and she said, well, I'm pretty sure that your son is autistic. And that was from the distance of a phone call, getting, here's the diagnosis, here's the reality, step into this, your kid's not yet 2. And of course, we took Zeke over for diagnosis, and she did the evaluation, and she came up with, here's where you are. And there was no sugar pill. There was no, let me kind of give you that it might not be the case. You'll grow out of it. We have a cure for you. All that stuff, which I think can often come into play in terms of the phenomenology of the parent who wants a diagnosis like this, right? There's always resistance to it. Maybe they're making a mistake. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe I can avoid this. Maybe we can keep kind of going with the idea that somehow magically something will happen, a miracle will come about, and we will lose that diagnosis, right? So I think that that's kind of the early challenge for a parent, and deciding at what age do you really want to get some firm expert opinion to give you a sense of where you are. And that can possibly, and maybe Peggy can speak to this from the psychological, school psychologist's point of view, but that could potentially delay when you're going to get a diagnosis and how that all plays out in terms of being eligible for services. I don't know if Peggy, you have any thoughts on that side of it.
And I think for some parents, it's overt. I mean, perhaps your child has blindness, and so that's
Right.
something that's so overt. But
Right.
when it's questionable,
Mhm.
in the case of your son, it might be questionable early on, or if someone has a learning disability, that's questionable because we don't really know those things. it's a very challenging position to be in, to want to support the parent, support the child, and perhaps know what direction we should be going in. But it's a difficult pill to swallow sometimes for parents. And many times I think schools sugarcoat some things. And so
Sure.
sometimes we classify students as learning disabled when in fact maybe they are intellectually deficient or they're challenged in a different way. So you're walking a very fine line, I think, with parents and students and school districts. And somehow we have to get them all, speaking the same language for the better of the child. And it's not always easy for anybody, I think, especially when a child's very, very young, because as you say, everybody's got that hope that maybe you got it wrong, and maybe my child's going to grow out of this, and maybe, he had words and lost words, but now he's going to get them back again. So there's always
that can, and if you think about a child, and depending on what age this is happening early on, could be before 2, it could be 3. You're not really entering the school system until the child's around 6, right? Is that the, the formal, like
5,
kindergarten, 5, 6.
It's preschool special education if you start early enough, or it's early intervention, 0.
Yes.
But yes, and so the school district has some responsibility for the preschool years, although it's usually taken care of elsewhere. But they are the people who are mandated to monitor all of that. But they don't know the child necessarily. So it's very difficult.
It's very kind of challenging. In the case of Isabel Rappin, who was our neurologist, she was well established, and she was as direct can be, and there was no hemming or hawing or maybeing or anything. And it was just, well, now that you know what it is, here are the clear implications. And so she laid those out. And that's an opportunity to kind of consider that education is what we can offer to a parent who has a child with a developmental disability like autism. And that's tricky too, because you enter into another world, which is the medical arena. And there are often all kinds of ideas that if you change this diet or this doctor or that doctor, we can solve this for you. We have something that you just don't realize, and that conventional, wisdom might not recognize, but try our track for a while and maybe it will work. And that is something that parents have to understand and appreciate. And in our case, Dr. Rappin said there's one thing that will help. It's not a cure, but it's that early intervention programming is what we know, can work. That's the one thing that can work. And so we were directed to a developmental pediatrician, and she was really excellent in framing out what kind of an education, since we're dealing with the early years, would a 2-year-old, someone who's just turned 2, benefit from. And that was critical to get the diagnosis, and then to work with a developmental pediatrician who could lay out an educational plan. And so when we went to the early intervention folks, because children at that age are eligible for early intervention, you don't have to go to a neurologist. I believe that a pediatrician could recommend early intervention. But having that in hand, the report from a developmental pediatrician that included things like applied behavior analysis and structured play, and was very in depth about that. When we were dealing with the county, which is how it worked when we were in New York, having that allowed us to get a variety of services. And I think that's kind of the important thing for parents to realize, that within their own journey of acceptance and understanding are also some opportunities to get some helpful services if you can lay out what the problem is and what at least someone who's an expert in the field would recommend as a proper protocol. And in our case, that led to having some support for funding for ABA services, as well as for a specialized school that my son went to. This was before you would even be going to, kindergarten, and that was very constructive for us. So I think that as much as you can benefit from the guidance that a developmental pediatrician and a good neurologist can offer, that can also sway county and school officials to be somewhat more proactive in terms of what's being offered, rather than say, well, we don't know, and we'll try a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and all of a sudden the time goes by. So that's kind of the sense that I had. I don't know if Lisa, if you have any thoughts, or you know, in terms of how your process worked in the earlier years.
Well, yeah, a few things. You know, when my son started early intervention at 6 months old, actually, and that's because of my sister-in-law, who's an OT. The doctors didn't mention, none of his doctors ever mentioned early intervention.
Right.
But my sister-in-law did, so we had him started early. And but when he was diagnosed at 3 with intellectual disabilities, I'll never forget this. He had a doctor down in Einstein, Ruth Kaminer, also a developmental pediatric neurologist. And she said, like, one is a delay, not a delay any longer. I mean, I will never forget those words for the rest of my life.
Right.
And it was like, oh, okay, because he was always labeled developmentally delayed, developmentally delayed. But like, you know, when do you call it?
Right.
And through her and, you know, just her like phenomenal knowledge, you know, we were able to really, I almost felt like armed. I almost felt like, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. So I could read about it. I could learn about it. Before it was like, well, what's going on? What's happening? It was very confusing. I mean, he also had medical issues. So, you know, we were, you know, running down to Westchester Medical every other week.
Yes.
You know, going to all these doctors. So, but yes. And I think it's really, really important. I tell other parents this all the time, get the diagnosis. It's so important for the school system. You know, that diagnosis means a lot. So I think that's critical. You know, you have to be able to, you know, you just have to be able to, as difficult as it is, you need to confront it. I mean, we love to live in denial.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to know clearly and concisely what you're dealing with. And I think that's so true. Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Stacy? Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to chime in a little bit also with my parent experience, which speaks to both of the stories that both you, Dr. Kahana, and also Lisa have shared. I too am a parent of a child with autism. I have an older boy, Jason, who was a late talker. And because he was a late talker, I was told to get a speech evaluation for him. It was all in his mind. And 3 months later, all the words came out his mouth. When we had Eric, he wasn't really talking, but at that time I thought, oh, he's a late talker just like his brother. And I happened to be at a pediatrician appointment for an annual, and the doctor said, you know what, his words just aren't intelligible enough. He wasn't using anything with enunciation, and you should get a speech evaluation. And we wound up with that. And the speech eval turned into, shortly after that, a multidisciplinary evaluation for his whole person and his developmental milestones at the time. And they left me with the PDD ASD book. And I didn't really know what autism was that day. The speech therapist in our story was, first of all, thank you very much to Dr. Klabwala, our pediatrician, for not saying, let's wait 3 or 6 months, go get an eval. And then the speech fellow that came over, I'll always be grateful for, Joel Wentworth, gave us what's called an MCHAT, which is the modified checklist for children and toddlers with autism. And it's a series of 18 questions. And within those are 6 hidden flags for potential autism. And we had answered no to all of the flag questions. And Joel reviewed that with us. And then he highly recommended we go see a neurologist. Coming out of the neurologist office, I have to say, from my experience, was a balloon lifting. Like Lisa said, it gave me answers. It gave me direction. I now knew where I needed to go. I felt like the diagnosis paperwork was his train ticket to service. And today, I still believe that's a real part of his story. 5 days later, we had a team of early intervention therapists in our living room meeting to compose his plan and get on board. one thing that I really like to empower parents with when I have the opportunity, because I am a mom of 2, and many other families have larger numbers of siblings, including Lisa's mom of 3. I think it's really important to include the sibling in the learning circle when the therapist comes over. And it's really important to know why that's important. That's when that therapist leaves after a 30 or 45-minute or a 60-minute session, your child that's trying to learn more skills and close certain learning gaps is left with siblings. And who's a better playmate or a better supporter to have learned the skill the therapist is trying to roll out than your own sibling in your own home, in addition to yourself as a mom or a dad or a caregiver learning from the therapist. Now we all carry over the skills. So like what Peggy was saying about the connect and the disconnect between the school, the medical piece, and the home, where we need to make more connection, we also need to say out loud, the siblings should be a part of that. And it should be a unified experience in all those arenas for all the right reasons. We participate with Special Olympics. And what's better than having my young son as a swimmer on my team and my older son as my assistant coach on the pool deck? Suddenly it became a family experience as opposed to just serving my special needs child, which we all know as a parent of, the balance is very challenging and it's hard to work that out and make it more even. That's not really the case. So, you know, and to empower other families that may be listening and watching, my strong message is to include the siblings however and whenever possible. And to, you know, ultimately Jason became a mini therapist in the learning circle here. And I think it served everyone well. He would stand up today and let you know he's proud of the work that he was able to do and help Eric close his learning gaps. I don't think there's a cure. I don't really like when, sorry, one of my athletes calling. I don't really like when professionals claim there's a cure and you should follow this therapy or you should follow this type of path with strategies and suggestions. I think we can always improve and make better, but I think it's important to say that the neurology wiring of the child, and I've seen this in Temple Grandin's talks a number of times where she shows the science behind the brain and the neurology connections and the way things happen are different. And I've seen that work in real life with my son. He just thinks differently. It's really true. He has a different view and a perspective on stuff. And you guys, Lisa and Jeff, I'd love to hear your opinion on that. You know, when Eric is doing and seeing things, he just sees it a little bit different. And sometimes I even find it's refreshing, you know, and I learn from him. And I feel like when I'm really paying attention to the details, wow, I never would have thought of that. So I'm not out to change him. I love that kid to pieces. And he's taught me a lot. And I wouldn't change him for a heartbeat. Would I change some of the challenges that we've experienced as a family because of that? Sure. You know, but early on in a parent training, I was told Eric chose me to be his mom, and I'm honored for that. So I'd love to hear you guys' perspective on that one.
I think those are great points. I mean, I really like the two things that stood out for me were the idea of how the physician, and I think you mentioned it was a neurologist, became a train ticket. Is that what you said? You know, to what came next. I mean, there's really some importance to that concept of how things are interlocked and interconnected. And I have a few thoughts that I mean pop up in my mind as I think about those interconnected components. And I like the idea also of how it's a family affair. It's not just about the one child. How do you support them with your other children? And that can be challenging, and it's a very worthwhile thing to build in. So I really like those ideas. Lisa, what do you think? I mean, in terms of that.
Yeah, well, one of the first things I learned after Gabriel, he was diagnosed with intellectual disabilities and then with autism, it's like, it's not a label, it's a ticket. And I took that to heart because that opened up so many services for him. So absolutely. And I mean, I've learned so many things from Gabriel. One of the things that served me so well in my life as a caregiver He taught me just to wait and see, you know, not to jump to conclusions, not to go through those anxiety loops in your head, because, you know, he had all, like I said, he had a lot of medical issues. It's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? He has to go for, you know, this MRI and this and that. It's like, you're worried. And like, wait, just wait and see what's going to happen. You know, don't jump to conclusions. And he taught me that. And I totally embody that now, especially as I was taking care of my mother and my husband when I was caregivers for them. That helped a great deal. And, you know, they're all so unique. You know, our kids, every child is unique. And our kids just open up this ability of love like no other. And he's taught my children, he's taught his other siblings, like the meaning of just openness and caring and accepting, and just, you know, when I was little, my dad had polio in his arm. He had almost no use of his right arm. And to us, it was just typical. I mean, we didn't think anything of it, but when we were out in the community, you'd see people staring at it and this and that, but to us, it was completely normal. And I think, you know, it's that same thing when we're out with our kids. To us, they're completely normal. This is the way it is. But you see other people may have like look in another way, but it's, you know, it's education. We never ever didn't go somewhere because of Gabriel, because of maybe behaviors, because of anything. I mean, this would be 7 years to get him out of his diapers, 7 years to toilet train him. But, you know, during that time, I had the potty in the car, we'd stop, and you know, nothing stopped us from going anywhere. And you just, you know, everybody loves him now. Anybody who meets him loves him. He teaches more. He teaches, you know, they teach us more than we could ever teach them. Amen to that, Stacey, right?
I want to trail off your patience comment, which reminds me of a really awesome anecdotal story that I'll just pop in right here real quick. Patience, 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 right? I mean, I love to say when somebody once taught me, what does it take to get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And that, you know, loops me back into Eric and his world of teaching me patience as a parent. One day we were here in the house and he was having a dry bowl of Cocoa Puff cereal and they spilled, and it was in the living room, and I came in with the dust buster, and like most of us, you know, I turn it on and I clean like this, and then I was empowering him. He was 3 years old. I said, okay, buddy, it's your turn. I turned it off. I brought him over and I hand over hand helped him with his thumb to turn the machine on, and he left the machine right there on the floor and went over and got a Cocoa Puff from over here and brought it to the machine, and it sucked it up and went over and got another one and continued this pattern until his area was completed. Now, wow, sure. But there was so much in that message with the layers of, Mom, my way is different and it's going to take longer. Please have patience, but we'll both get the job done. And I do learn from him all the time. Your Gabriel is fantastic. He's charming. He has a great smile. I remember your sibling story is similar. His older brother and also his sister are in the game. They're helpful. That is part of a family dynamic that we share and we grow together, and that's what we do.
You know, I'm not sure if the three of you really get it about the richness of what you bring to the table. You really bring incredible.
Well, you're, you know, I think that the spirit of the meeting and of wanting to share and support each other is a reflection of the way you do business. I mean, Larry has been an exemplary leader on this journey from the inception, spearheading, orchestrating, coming up with the ideas and then putting them into practice. Of course, working with Elaine, and Elaine has been, I think, phenomenal in terms of being able to see organizationally how you do these things, but the general sentiments of wanting to support each other. I mean, we just, we're so appreciative to you, Larry, for
Thank you.
Sort of putting this into, I mean, and it's also, I mean, as your friend and sort of a colleague, I can say, you live this. I mean, you are by your nature. I remember many years ago, Larry was supervising me when I just came to the Mount. And not only do I have one Franklin planner, I have two of them. And his first review noted that I had some challenges in the area of time management as papers were flying all over the place. And the copier was left like with things inside of it and outside of it. And I got my first review. I was so excited. What's it going to say? And it had a detailed sort of path forward, but it didn't stop with the idea of time management, because that's only part of the system. The other thing was I needed to get hold of Stephen Covey. I needed to find him as a mentor. Now, this is probably almost 20 years later, but there you are, Dr. Force. I mean,
Thank you, buddy. But, and I appreciate that, but clearly we would not be here if we all weren't here, you know, and think about the people, you know, with this proactive caring, started out as a concept, you know, and I appreciate, you know, your compliment, but let's circle back. You were the one that came up with the name, proactive.
actually, it's Covey's first chapter.
I know it is. I know it is. I know it is. Okay, and the fact I know it is, and the fact is that, you know, here we are, and think about all the people we've met along the way. And oh, by the way, let's put COVID in there. Let's see how you dance around that. You know, and did we dance? I remember the first conversation with Lisa and Peggy saying, "We have a lot of content. We have no way to assemble. What do you think?" And we came together. And Lisa and Peggy and Lisa, you know, the corner, Eric drawing the stick figures. I mean, it's just incredible what they have done in leading this forward.
Yes,
So now here we are.
Really,
Yes.
Lisa and Peggy
Applause.
have done, you know, week in and week out.
Yes.
Just wonderful sessions. And if anybody is watching, they should go onto the website. Larry, maybe you can put up that proactivecare.org and go through them, because they really are an invaluable source of support and education and learning. You know, we learn from each other and our experiences that may be different, but in a way can be enhancing and sort of synergistic, and they build on each other. The one thought that I don't want to lose in my head was the idea of this early diagnosis, or the diagnosis that when you get it and you get the clarity. Sometimes in the pediatrician's office, there can be reluctance to say, this is what it is, or go to a neurologist and find this diagnosis, because nobody wants to be early on pushed in that direction too quickly. You have to also be able to process the implications of such a diagnosis. And that's one of the reasons these things can be delayed. And it could even be attractive maybe to wait a while, wait a year, wait a couple of years, wait till the school system has the child, wait till the school psychologist, you know, identifies the problem. Who wants to make trouble for themselves? And what I think I hear from Stacy and what I hear from Lisa is that it was so important to get that early statement so that you could know what it is and obtain services that way. And I'll share one way in which we found that once we had the diagnosis and we had, you might hear Zeke in the background, but once we had the diagnosis and we had the recommendations from the developmental pediatrician, and then we were working with early intervention, and we put together, here's what the preschool would look like. We had some challenges over the ABA, but ultimately that was accepted because, you know, they could have said, well, he doesn't need it, and they could have challenged it that way, but they didn't do that. So we were able to get those services. And when it came to going into our school district, that foundation was very helpful for the next step along the way. So having had that kind of wide range of services to begin with made it easier to sort of bring that forward. And I think that's very important, because two things happen, and they're sort of difficult to process when you're actually in the midst of them. On the one hand, when you have those clear statements from experts, whether it's a neurologist, a pediatric, developmental pediatrician, here's what the education should be. You build those in with the early intervention, and maybe in your first IEPs, you're going to have a lot of those services. That's very beneficial, because as the child gets older, my experience has been, it's like a funnel. And in the early stages, the funnel is wide. But as you move through time-wise, that funnel starts to narrow and narrow and narrow away from sort of engagement with their typical peers, with age-appropriate education. And so you're struggling in a way, because as children get older and they work their way through the system and they become more and more identified as autistic, and the range of being able to be integrated with the rest of the students becomes less and less. And so that's one of the challenges, why I think having as much support early on and building as wide a funnel in the beginning is helpful. And it becomes harder for school districts to remove those things once they're already in place. They would have to say, well, here's why you don't need this, or here's why you don't need this, or this is unnecessary. So I think that's one of the reasons why going from the early diagnosis to the educational plan and then building that into the first IEP is a helpful use of those clinical resources for your child's benefit.
And that's an excellent point. One of the things that's been one of our trademarks throughout all of this is Lisa presenting a simple exercise. You know, let's not forget the theme of tonight is from the lived experience, the IEP process, and how to go through it in a stress-free way. But before we get to that and get to the summary points, we have two people that have joined us now, Camelia and Zoya. Would you, either one of you, like to identify yourself or add anything? Please, at this point, please feel free to do that.
Hello, sorry.
That's okay.
Identify with what?
You know, just who you are and how you heard about us and how we can be of help to you.
Oh, well, I hear about you guys through a friend, Louis, and well, I have a kid with Down syndrome who is in the spectrum, so that's why I came into the meeting.
Well, we're so glad you're here, and we have, as Dr. Kahana said, we have a website, and it's called
Yes.
proactivecaring.org. And also,
Yes.
there's a way to contact us. So you can reach out to us, you can reach out to Elaine, and anything we can do to help bring you into our network and provide you with information, we will do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Zoya, would you like to say anything?
Sure. Thank you for this. So I'm a child psychiatrist, and I often recommend families specifically to the parent-to-parent network. And I believe that is how I heard about this group. And so I got an invite this evening, and I thought, hey, I'd like to see and see what this is about. And this has just been wonderful. And it feels like a great support for families, parents, that I would really highly recommend. I know I've joined one previous session. I think it was like a mindfulness or deep breathing one that you've done in the past. And I know you've recorded them. I haven't been able to take a look at the other ones, but that was great too. So I'm really happy to have joined and heard some of these stories, and just the power of supporting each other is there's nothing like it. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And we know now, you know, we started off, as I said at the beginning, with a mailing list just shy of 400. Now we're up to 4,000. So we know that our network has grown. And the fact is, we were never under any illusion that people were just going to be able to join us for this broadcast. We knew that they'd be able to watch it in their own space at their own time. And that's why we decided on this format. But please feel free to share any resources, anything we can do on our proactivecaring.org website. There are free downloadable mountains and mountains of resources that we're very proud of. So thank you for joining us. Peg, any comment before Lisa does the summary?
Well, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what everyone was saying. My advice to all parents is to get as early a diagnosis, as early intervention as possible. And if you don't know what's going on, then go out there and try to figure it out with some of the experts, because the earlier you get those supports, the better off your child will be, hopefully, when they start school. And as Jeffrey said, it gives you some meat to go to the school with and say, these are the things that we were doing, these are the directions that we're headed in. So I always advocate as early as possible when you notice things. And sometimes you have to jump through some hoops, because people do, as Lisa said, give you diagnoses that include delays. But if you pursue it, I think certainly as a parent, you know when things are not maybe the norm, or if you have other children, as Stacy said, you kind of see differences. So I think that the earliest intervention is the best intervention.
Yeah.
Please.
Two things. I totally agree with Peggy. I mean, one of the things, like Gabriel was in, early intervention, and from there it was a very smooth transition to, a specialized preschool. And then from there, looking at programs, looking into the next phase. So it definitely made it, gave him more services. And the other thing that Zoya said, because one of the most important things from the beginning was finding other parents, was finding support groups. Because, you're finding other people who are walking the walk and talking the talk, who've gone through the same things as you. And it's a tremendous, tremendous source of support and incredible amounts of knowledge. Sometimes much more so than any doctor, or any professional. We're other parents. So I strongly, strongly recommend anybody who's doing this, looking up the resources that we have and finding a parent support group, even if it's online.
Absolutely. Would you be able to demonstrate what a stress-free, mindfulness-based exercise, a simple exercise could be? Because one of the things that we were very clear about, just one second, one of the things we were very clear about is we're not talking about a yoga mat in a lotus position.
No.
We're talking about the idea of breathing in, breathing out. We're talking about capturing the moment. We talk about micro meditation. We talk about pause thought. That's how simple it can be. And I keep always going back to the example in your own personal life, when there was a point you said, I don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
And that's when you started your practice of meditation.
Right.
Stace?
I wanted to chime in and just empower parents with one other really important concept about when you're building a therapy team, whether it's an early intervention in your preschool stage or when you get to school age for your child, that parent training sometimes goes under the wire, and it's actually in the special ed law, and it's a right that you have to be able to receive specific training as a parent to be able to help empower yourself with strategies and suggestions and education. And like Lisa suggested, getting involved in a parent group and meeting other parents with a similar profile to your story is super empowering and very supportive. And as much as I've learned from other therapists and teachers, I agree with Lisa. Equal or maybe more I've learned from my fellow autism mom heroes that I've connected with over the years. And there's a lot of strength in that. And to always be thinking ahead. One mom that comes to mind for me has taught me, you're here now, but what are your next 3 steps? And so I think that that's also important to empower others to be open-minded to what you got to focus on what you're doing here in the now. And Lisa will bring us back to the present moment in a moment. And where are you going? So to have some confidence and build your plan and set some goals forward, I think is really important and part of the message. And with that, I want to introduce Lisa Nathan to offer us a mindfulness meditation, as I'm a fast-paced, redheaded New Yorker that thought I could never meditate. And she taught me how, and I'm always grateful to you for that, Lisa. You told me it was okay not to clear my mind. But actually, I've learned through neurological science that I can only focus on one thought at a time. And you
That's
taught
absolutely
me
correct. All right, so maybe we'll incorporate all of this in a little mini session. So, all right, let's start. I automatically, if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. I always just go inside, and we'll just start by taking just some nice breaths, just plain old breathing, nothing to control, nothing to force. And what we're going to do is we're going to go out of our mind loops, the thoughts in our head, by coming into our bodies. So let's just start by relaxing our eyes. Just feel them just fall naturally into our sockets. Relax our jaws. We hold so much tension in our jaws. Just feel our jaws, our lips relax. Feel our shoulders just drop away from our ears. We hold tremendous tension in our shoulders. Just let them naturally fall. Let your belly relax. Come down to your sit bones, where you're sitting, whatever you're contacting with, just be aware. Just bring your attention to where you're sitting. You're going down into your body with your feet flat on the floor. If there's any tension, just feel the tension draining out of you, going right down through your feet into the ground. Now let's do a little bit of breathing that will help to turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the system for digest and rest. Our sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight mode. And when we're stressed, that gets triggered. And breathing is a phenomenal way to actually like hack our brain's programming to go into relaxation. So we're going to do that by breathing in through our nose for a count of 4. And then breathing out through our mouth, like we're trying to blow out a candle, for an extended count, for about a count of 7. So let's do that for a couple of rounds. I'll keep the count for us. Breathe in through your nose for a count of 4. And out, blowing out a candle for a count of 7. Again, inhale. Exhale, 2. Inhale. Exhale. One more time, inhale. Exhale. You can do this at any time during the day, anytime you know something happens, you're stressed. You can use this breath, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then we're just going to go back to our natural breath and feel the air coming in through our nostrils and out through our nostrils. And just bring our attention to the breath. And the benefits of meditation are when you notice that your mind wanders, because it will wander. The benefit is recognizing when it wanders and bringing it back to the breath. It doesn't matter within even a minute of breathing how often your mind wanders. It's the coming back. That's the training your mind. And eventually what will happen as you train your mind to come back, you become more mindful and more aware. And that's where you develop that pause, that space, the ability to respond rather than to react to something. It gives you that momentary pause. Instead of yelling when something happens, like as Stacy told us with the Cocoa Puffs, it gives you that slight pause, and that can make all the difference. So let's just take a few more breaths. And with much gratitude for everybody here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. Jeffrey, as always, a tip of the hat. Lisa, Peggy, tip of the hat. Elaine, tip of the hat. Stacy, a tip of the hat. And Camelia, please, thank you for joining us. And please come back and become part of our conversation. So we will see you in 2 weeks, and wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Namaste.